Hello everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to the 9th Karachi Literature Festival. This session will launch the book titled The Three Innocents and Ors, Chughtai on Childhood. The book has been translated by Tahira Naqvi, and for this session we have Shehnaz Ijazuddin and Sabeen Javeri as participants. Our moderator for this session would be Saman Shamsi. Saman Shamsi is the author of 2 books for children. She has been in London involved in the Preston Road Community Library campaign and later named its Children's Laureate. In 2016, the library held the Saman Shamsi Young Writers Challenge for Children. She is currently a primary school teacher at the Karachi Grammar School. In the 1990s, she worked in Karachi as a ceramic artist and conducted ceramic workshops at art schools. Ladies and gentlemen, the session will be followed by a Q&A session. Please refrain from making a statement and keep your questions as precise as possible. Once the session is over, please do not stand near or on the stage because we have back-to-back sessions and we need the stage and the area surrounding it clear for our next session. Over to you, Sabeen. Hello.
Okay, is this work? Yes. Yes. The book launch is Ismat Chughtai's The Three Innocent and Ors, Chughtai on Childhood. It's an anthology translated by Tahira Naqvi, who sadly cannot be with us today. Tahira Naqvi is a translator, writer, and Urdu language lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University. She has translated the works of Manto, Munshi Premchand, Khatija Mastoor, and Ismat Chughtai into English. I did ask her a few questions which she has sent answers to, so I will include that in today's session, and I will do a couple of readings from her, some excerpts from her book. My other 2 panelists, I'd like to introduce you to them. Sabeen Javeri is an award-winning short story writer and the author of the best-selling novel Nobody Killed Her. Her short stories on the topic of gender, class, and the immigrant experience, as well as her texts on creative writing, have been widely published. Her research is currently exploring the works of forgotten literary heroes of the subcontinent and developing a discourse related to cultural identity through creative writing. Her next book is a collection of short stories titled Hijabistan, which is to be published next year. She is currently assistant professor at the Arzu Center for Literature and Languages at Habib University, Karachi. Shehnaz Ijazuddin is our second panelist. She was born in Peshawar, brought up in places as scattered as Makran and Chitral, educated in Karachi, and lived as an expatriate in Abu Dhabi and is now, as she says, unsettled in Lahore. Drawing upon her deep interest in Urdu and Persian, she spent many years researching the Tilisme Shroba before compiling an English translation in a single volume condensed from 7 volumes of the Urdu original. This was published by Penguin India in 2009. She has also translated 4 stories from A.R. Khatoon's Kahaniyan. She has been a columnist with a leading English newspaper and has written for several other publications in India and Pakistan. Her collection for her articles, Lost from View, was published in 1994. So, sorry, I have lots of papers here. So, of course, Ismat Chughtai is well known as one of Urdu's finest writers, and she is probably best known for some of her more controversial short stories. But this anthology is interesting and unusual in that it focuses on Chughtai's writings on childhood. Childhood often suggests innocence, but Chughtai's sharp eye is evident in these works, as is her sense of humor. I asked Tahira why write about childhood? And this was her response. During my long association with Chaktai, I have always looked for commonalities, parallels, and similarities in her stories so that I can put together a collection that will address particular aspects of her work. I generally do not randomly pick stories to include in a collection. Also, I'm always looking for new stories to work on, and last year my search yielded Teen Anari, The Three Innocents, a new story that I had not translated before. It is such a delightful story and so different in terms of the style one is accustomed to seeing in Ismat's work that I decided to do some research and find other stories written in the same vein. There were not so many, sadly, but whatever I found was important enough, in my opinion, to put together in a collection. I am very lucky to have Ritu Menon of Women Unlimited as my publisher and editor. She has always encouraged every Ismat venture I have undertaken, and in this case, she suggested we include excerpts from Teri Lakir that contains some of the most important and powerful sections on themes of childhood. Shehnaz, would you like to comment on the what your thoughts were when you read this anthology first? Should we start with that?
Yes, we can. Assalamu alaikum. You know, of all the things that have been written by Ismat Chughtai, the one that I naturally took to were the accounts of her childhood.
Yes.
Because they're so beautifully written, so colloquially written, and of course they have a resonance with us because we do belong to the same region, and therefore there is a lot of commonality, although her childhood could be brutal. So yes, the bachpan is what I'm inclined to read of all her stories.
Whenever I've attended a talk on translation, someone always brings up the point that Urdu is a very nuanced language and hard to translate. Is this something that daunts you as a translator? Is it a challenge you relish? And in the case of Ismat Chughtai in particular, she's well known for her different uses of colloquialism. Do you think that makes it tougher to translate than other writers? I've asked Tahira also a similar question, but I'd like your feedback first.
Well, I can only, I'm not in the business of translation. So what I did for the Tilisme Hoshruba was a labor of love. And of course, it was several volumes. So I did get to learn on the job, as it were. And what I found was that when you're translating, there is such a thing as over-translating, which you have to avoid. And also to there are nuances. So I think, I don't know about Tahira, but for me, when I translated the Tilisme Hoshruba, the image of the reader was always someone from the subcontinent somehow. So I did keep a lot of the original terms. For instance, कहते हैं कि जी मियाँ कहाँ जा रहे हो? So, to translate it as, sir, where are you going, didn't sound right to me, and I kept Mia. And so I kept terms like that and just gave it a glossary at the end. With Ismat, there's this very informal way of talking, almost like it's not a formal way of speaking Urdu or writing Urdu at all. And it runs through all her books, I think, the spontaneity. Yes. And this referring to herself as humne ye kiya, humne wo kiya. So there is that element to her. So what was your question exactly? That
is it daunting, is Urdu being a very nuanced language, is it daunting and challenging to translate? Or
no, I think it depends on how much you're into that particular piece of writing that you're translating. If you're passionate about it, it doesn't seem difficult at all. If it's done as an academic exercise, I don't know. That is another thing altogether.
Sometimes maybe you have to compromise on the imagery to make it work in another language, or sometimes...
Actually, that is the easy part of it.
That is the easy part of it.
Okay. So the imagery comes through very nicely.
Yes.
It's the colloquialisms.
Yes.
Yeah. In
In
my
fact-
case, the swear words that
Actually, Tahira said something similar, that the challenges have to do with a rich and complex style. The metaphors, similes, symbols, expressions, colloquialisms, the nuances of the Begmati Zaban, the intensity of feeling, the complexity of figures of speech. But at the same time, it gives you the opportunity to read Ismat, and as she translates her work, that's a source of immense joy and satisfaction. And in terms of sticking to the essence of the original language, she says that she's a literalist. I believe that when a student of Chughtai picks up a translation, he or she has to be able to get as close to the writer as well as the work as possible. One colonizes the work one translates, one inhabits it and tries to make it one's own. And as such, I believe in being a gentle colonizer, staying in the shadows myself as Ismat takes over. Sometimes this results in what critics may deem a lumbering or awkward translation. I don't worry about that. But I don't like to add, take away, or edit the work either. Other translators do it. I'm working on a new translation of Lehaf, because I find the existing translations have missed the point. But that's a discussion for another day.
yeah, that's right.
Yes. Should we do a little reading, I think, from one of the stories and then move on to discuss the work? I think, Sabine, would you like to read a bit first?
Okay, so I'll read an extract from the Complete Line. So this takes place after there's been a new addition in the Chughtai family. A new baby has just arrived, which they're not really looking forward to, but nevertheless another new baby has arrived. And a vet nurse has been required to take care of that baby. And although the book is about childhood, and on the surface of it, the writings are very jolly, very jovial, very light. But at times, Ismat, in a very unique way, addresses issues which are very relevant to this day, especially. So here's the extract. Uma, the vet nurse, was very young, 16 or 17 perhaps. Sometimes at night, Una continued to sleep while Shaman lay wrapped in soy nappies. Shaman is a new baby. It wasn't easy to awaken Una, but she certainly had plenty of milk to offer, and when Una's lover hitched Shaman on his shoulders and ran around pretending to be a horse, Shaman, forgetting all her sorrows, chortled and brilliant. Unknown to other members of the household, the three of them often retreated to the barn where the hay for the cows was stored. Here Una rolled on the hay and her lover after her while Shaman crawled around the two of them, clapping her hands. But seeing the fight with Una distressed her and she began whimpering. She hated quarrels. Whenever she saw two dogs tangled in a ferocious tussle, her whole body trembled fearfully and she screamed until the dogs, alarmed by her shrieks, abandoned their scuffle and made off. No one could touch Una while Shaman was awake. If Una's lover tried to tease her by holding Una's hand and saying, "She's mine," Shaman immediately let out a sharp cry of protestation. But she was not punished for her brazenness. One day, while the three of them rolled around on the hay as usual, she fell asleep and was soon lost in a world of innocent dreams. In front of her, behind her, all around, she saw Unas and more Unas. Mad with joy, she left eagerly from one lap to the next. But suddenly, all the Unas disappeared. Her spirits drooped, and sitting around like a hungry bitch, she began looking for Una. Finally, she found her. On a pile of catching grass, fleshy and ripe like a mango, was a soft, warm Una. She cooed and burrowed herself into the rounded softness, her lips moving, the veins in her throat throbbing as if she were gulping down great quantities of milk. She gagged, and when she reached out her chubby hands, a monster pushed her away, and grabbing Una, wrestled her down. She screeched fiercely as though she had been bitten by snakes, her childish eyes blazed by the rewarding scene before her. Hearing her scream and howl, the water carrier, the sweeper, and the cook made a hurried dash to the shed, and the offenders were apprehended. That same night, Una was sent back to Agra by train. So, for me, even though Ismet is usually known for her light writings of childhood, there are very dark layers to what she writes. And again, she is known for being a writer who has addressed back in 1930s issues of sexuality, of child abuse. Again, here we see a very dark layer to what is supposed to be the innocence of childhood. I think she's addressing some very serious issues over here, which sadly are very relevant to what's happening in Pakistan at the moment. So for me, this is a very important piece of writing that has been published at the moment, because I think it's very much needed that we have this awareness. And as we should always provide a platform for debate, I think it's a good time for this book to be out, because we need this debate.
Yes, childhood, not quite that same sort of carefree space that one sort of imagines it in her books. The child is unsupervised and she's rolling around in the mud and she's getting dirty, but the way she's treated, throughout, in fact, in all four, there's one excerpt from the novel, there are a couple of short stories, and then one piece is autobiographical, but they're just getting walloped, and there's no one really listening to children in the stories. It's whether they're guilty or not, nobody questions. It's like everyone gets punished. And I found that a very disturbing thread through the novel also, that even though there's a sort of a light-heartedness, there's also this dark undertone. Yes.
That's what makes it even more gripping. Because on the surface, the writing is very light, but the layer underneath is very dark. And what's really important over here is how, again and again, in her writings, she points out how the children are not heard.
Yes.
Even when they do fight with the parents and the older sisters, she really dismissed their concerns and queries and not taken into
All the joys of a large family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shehnaz, I think we can do another reading from yours. Is a very different reading, and I think that shows her humor coming through also.
Well, I was going to read that, and then there's this other
Changed your
wonderful
mind.
part,
There's so many
which
good
is
parts to
vintage-
read from. Yes.
vintage Ismat. And after the bathing and the breakfast, both of which are nightmares, in the afternoon everyone was lined up.
So which piece is this from? Is this from the
This
Crooked
is
Line?
from
again?
Bachpan Childhood.
Bachpan Childhood.
Right.
Okay.
So the Khas water cooler is on, the fan is on, and regulation number 34 has been imposed on us. Don't move, don't turn from one side to the other, don't roll on the floor, don't touch the melons and watermelons next to the cooler, and don't count them either. Don't swing from the cooler ledge, don't lie too close to each other, don't do this, don't do that. Now consider these don'ts carefully. The moment they are set free from the room with the Khas cooler, Chunnu and Shamim go off to play, but the female sex plays with dolls. The order is that we should sit down properly and play with dolls. It teaches us how to be well behaved. How can I explain how much I hated those wretched dolls? How can you play with them? They look like old-fashioned women, all bundled up in clothes not at all resembling English dolls that could be easily washed and bathed without anything going wrong. The situation with our dolls was such that in due days they began to look like wet rats. Generally, doll playing consists of doll weddings. I had a lot of girl dolls, but only one filthy male doll. He took turns playing the role of the earthly god for every female doll. If you asked for more male dolls, the response coming from some unknown psychological point of view would be, no, just play with the girl dolls, no need for a male doll. And so it all goes on.
Not very stereotypical girls also in her, even in the autobiographical piece,
That's
it's
right.
not very
That's
stereotypical.
right.
She was not your stereotypical girl playing with dolls, and yes.
And again, these are these gender stereotypes, and I think Ismet's writings are absolutely perfect for Simone about her theory about women Queen got born.
Yes.
You know, again and again she points out how she was made to conform a certain way according to the expectations of how women should be. And I think she does that really.
Yes.
And I feel that the experiences that, I mean, obviously all of these are real experiences. And what she went through, because she was what, the 10th child?
But she does talk about how the parents were just not interested in the children. The mother was, she's like,
They
I've had
kept
so many
producing,
children. She
right.
sort of, they were kind of unsupervised and left alone by the mother. Yes, that comes through in the stories also and even in the autobiographical piece.
Yeah.
But I think we're a little low on time.
Yeah.
So we can open it up for questions from the floor and then maybe we can, any questions?
Maybe we can do another reading.
Okay, should I do I can do a reading also.
Oh, you have a question? Homa has a question.
There's a question.
Just wait. She's bringing.
Hello, I have a question. It applies to this as well, but very much to the session that I've just been to, which was about the Me Too movement and women and women's identity and so on. What I find fascinating about Pakistan in particular is I live in England. I've lived there since I was a child. A lot of people in Pakistan who talk about gender equality and who talk about the view of women and so on, many of the same people don't ever talk about one glaring inequality that I feel exists in Pakistani society as a norm. And which is not questioned by anybody. And I find a lot of the elitist women who may be out demonstrating on the roads would never question that. And that is the whole custom of when a couple get married, the woman always goes to the man's home. If you ask a woman, well, how about if a couple got married and your son went to live with the woman? How would you feel about that? And people who believe in equality feel very sort of taken aback by a comment like that. And the answer is always, that's part of a custom that's always been there. And I really wonder if any of you can answer this question. Does that aspect of patriarchy ever get challenged or discussed or seen as something that is extremely sexist, unequal, and quite damaging to particularly those families where there are no sons? So the girls go and live in the men's house. So that's the question that I'd like you to answer.
Well, you know, Homa, we are not here to discuss feminism as such, but more about this particular book and Ismat Chughtai's perspective on it. But we can, yes, relate it to it.
This conversation yesterday, that Ismat's father actually used to encourage her to get out of this.
Absolutely.
Study and gain education. However, it's very interesting that it was the women in her family who encouraged her to be the epitome of what they considered womanhood, feminine. They encouraged her to be feminine. And what you talk about is really interesting because I feel in a lot of Asian societies or in a lot of conservative societies, we also talk about it being a patriarchal society. I think it's patriarchal in the public space, but I think in the private space, it's pretty much matriarchal. We have these women who are grandmothers or mother-in-laws who have a lot of power. It's almost as if the man is the head of the family and the woman is the neck of the family, the head returns whichever way. And I think a lot of times it's the women in the family who do need to make a conscious effort towards this change. Whether it's what you're talking about, a Gharjamai, as it's commonly known, which is very, very degrading, I think, to the man. A husband coming to live the term itself, not the whole idea. I think this is where the women in the family have to make a change and have to be more accepting as to what society thinks of them. And I think until that change comes from both men and women, I think we have a long way to go. So I think it's the women too who need to initiate that change.
We need more Ismat Chughtai's in our society, basically.
And I think there are many. I think today, which is about this topic about what happens when a woman refuses to take on her husband's name, and it addresses these kind of issues that you're talking about.
Any more questions?
There's one at the back. Just wait for the mic.
Just if the mic can come round.
That, you know, in one of her books, she
You
says,
hold the mic
actually,
closer to you because can't.
in one of her books, actually, she mentions that eventually they let her be, basically. You know, as a child, she was different more than rebellious, very different among so many brothers and sisters. But eventually, everybody kind of resentfully accepted her, and her brother used to encourage her to write. And he encouraged her to give her writings in magazines. Mirza Azim Beg Chughtai, who actually passed away before her, and she made a bigger writer than him. So I think the question more is of being different in a household, not just being a woman or a man. When especially, you know.
So I don't think she was different. I mean, who decides that this is how a woman should be and this is how a man should be? The very fact that she keeps on saying, I was different because I didn't like playing with dolls. But then again, who decides that if you're a girl child, you have to play with dolls, and if you're a boy child, you have to play with cars?
But she was talented, there's no doubt about that. And I mean, so that is where she stood out from the
The
rest
characters
of the
are
family.
also quite interesting that way because they are different. I mean, there's the initial one, that girl who sort of rolls around in the mud and gets dirty and sort of gets into trouble, but she's not being disobedient so more or willful, but it's just who she is in a way. And even the boys, there's an indulgence in the third story when they keep getting into trouble. They don't mean to get into trouble, but sometimes they do. They do lie and be naughty. But she sort of enjoys children who are not, you know, that stereotypical
don't
norm, or who are
conform.
not even the good child. They have a naughty spark in them or something. And yes, I think she does. Yeah. Yes, yeah. I think we have time for one more question. Any final comments here that we want to?
Well, I think we should let the book speak for itself.
Yes,
And
it's a
I
lovely
would
book.
encourage you to buy
Yes.
this book. It's very readable, and it brings you one step closer, those who don't read in Urdu, to Ismat Chughtai.
And I think 4 very different extracts.
Absolutely.
The stylistically very different, and even the storyline is quite different. And one of them is quite amusingly written, very lightly written, and
There's just one little piece right in the beginning, which I think will resonate with all of us. And it says that I slipped off the divan while in the throes of laughter. Please stop, for God's sake, I pleaded, wiping my eyes with the corner of my shirt front. In those days, we laughed at every little thing. Someone slipped, and we burst out laughing. The hen pecked at the puppy, and a storm of laughter erupted. If anyone happened to ask, girls, why are you laughing? Another attack of laughter would follow. We would be possessed by laughter as though it was an evil spirit. It paralyzed our bodies, our bones would begin to crackle, and our joints ached. And I think this is such a delightful passage, and it resonates with all of us. I mean, childhood giggling was a part of everyone's life. So to me, it was this commonality that all of us have in our childhood, which which I really liked in this book.
yes, I think so.
Yes, with laughter. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Please do get this book. It's a really wonderful book, and everyone should read as much as it can.
Yes.
And also read her in the Urdu originals. That's very important.
And if you can't read, you can watch on YouTube.
Yeah.